On behalf of the Professional Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches Society, I'd like to welcome you to the PBSCCS Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Messina.
All right, everybody. I'm here with Ricky DeLuna of the Boston Red Sox organization. Ricky, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate your time. Tell the listeners about yourself, if you would, please.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. This is really a cool opportunity to share where I've been and what I'm currently doing with the Red Sox. But I'm currently with the Florida Coast League, and I'm coordinating the Latin American Academy. I primarily work with the rookie guys and the newer guys coming in from the academy up to the Florida Coast League, and that's primarily what I do with the Red Sox.
Ricky, I've been dying to have you on for like years now, bro. So I'm very excited for this. The big point of discussion we're going to have today is on speed development. As long as I've known you, you've been my guy to bounce ideas off of about speed training for athletes. And so let's just kick it off, man. Just overall thoughts on speed development for baseball players, and then we'll kind of take a deeper dive in as we go.
Cool. Yeah, so, this past year I've reflected on the most critical times that we can improve on speed mechanics and plyometric competency. And I find the dynamic warm-ups that we all know that we'll have in our schedule on a daily basis is the opportunity that we have to create these good shapes, these good patterns that allow movement literacy. And the one thing I've taken away the most is dynamic warm-ups, and what you do as far as conditioning or preparation of conditioning is the bridge of how you're going to express all the strength qualities that we're developing in the weight room out in a more dynamic environment, and then that bridges over to the game itself. So, the dynamic warm-up I find is our opportunity to improve kinetics, and then kinetics dictate kinematics. And with that principle, you'll be in a good spot as far as having these guys well equipped. So the whole mechanical development component to me has been my biggest emphasis as far as just creating athletes, not baseball players, more so athletes prior to being a baseball player.
Yeah, the amount of time that we spend with guys, I think that warm-up time, it's hard because you do it every day, right? So sometimes guys are like, oh, we're doing warm-up again. And then some of them use it to talk to their friends and whatnot. But I think the lower levels, the younger kids especially, like, I think if you can get them focused for 10 to 15 minutes every day, like that's an important chunk of day for them to really take something for the rest of the day. And then specifically, like having somebody like you run a speed development, like I know they're going to get faster if they work with you, right? And I think for them, like being able to see how it translates to their game when they're running the bases, whatever, like I think creates more buy-in for them. So go into that a little bit. Like, what are you focusing on during these warm-ups? You talk about mechanics. Like, what are you working on with those guys specifically during that dynamic warm-up?
Yeah, so I feel the dynamic warm-up is our opportunity to look at or bucket your athletes into. So there's a concept I use that guides me into knowing what these guys express more so as far as strength qualities, and that's aerial athletes versus your terrestrial athletes. And I've taken this concept away from trail running because I've been into trail running for the longest time. And there's plenty of research on your aerial athletes versus your terrestrial athletes. And essentially what that is your aerial athletes are your athletes that will utilize more of the elasticity, like the bounce, and those guys are more efficient in max velocity phases, whereas your terrestrial athletes use the ground. They like to be on the ground more, and that's primarily because of the push, the forces behind each step. And those terrestrial athletes will be more of the guys that use acceleration longer just because they're more comfortable with using the ground. And so once you can start bucketing those guys, I think it'd make it easier for for us to know which phases these guys are the most comfortable in. And when you look at, you know, aerial athletes, they're in the air longer. They like to be upright. They like to be tall. And those guys are usually like your longer, taller athletes. And your terrestrial athletes are going to be more of like your stout, bigger, heavier, muscular guys. And those guys are comfortable with falling. And and you could start kind of picturing which guys can fall in those buckets as I speak now. And that's something that could help you have a better understanding of which strategies they use. So I very weirdly like to just look at or study different things, and I like to watch, you know, how animals move in nature. And you know, I like to use the aerial versus terrestrial concept to think of like an ox compared to a cheetah. The ox is going to use the ground to pull heavy weights because that's its genetics, and the epigenetics for it has been to push and pull heavy weights. So it's using the ground for that. Whereas a cheetah expands after each stride. It's in the air longer. And, you know, a fun fact is the cheetah is the one, and its only species, the cat with the longest spine and most flexible spine. So, you know, you look at what and how that cheetah has adapted to use as far as its own tools. It's using its very long and flexible spine to use those expansion strategies to stay in the air longer. So you know, when you start looking at you know, strength expressions in that form, to me it helps. You know, it's easy to kind of figure out, yeah, that group of guys I work with, they would fit more into the cheetah bucket, whereas, you know, your first or third basemen will generally fit into that terrestrial ox ground utilization strategy. And then from there, it's like, okay, I can start bucketing guys and start helping them get even better at that, or having them do, you know, the opposite side of the spectrum just to develop general athleticism. So, you know, an ox pulling the wagon, it's not gonna hurt its strength qualities to have it do what you know, like what you would term cheetah drills, or like your wickets or your maximum velocity tools, but it will help, you know, as far as it expressing strength at higher velocities. And we know that general athleticism is about expressing different strengths. And yes, an ox is going to pull more because that's how it's evolved and that's how it's been living. But having it do some cheetah drills could help it as far as just developing the whole spectrum of strength qualities.
So as you talk about this and you say, like, we can think of some of our athletes, like I'm thinking about myself, not that I qualify as anywhere near being athletic, but I probably feel more like an ox than a cheetah, right? And so it makes me think, like, one, when you're in the weight room, can you tell those guys right away, like, even if you're not out in the dynamic warm-up, like how guys lift, how they move, the weights they move, like the speeds they move the weights at? Can you tell your ox versus cheetah types in the weight room? And then two, do you train those types differently in the weight room? Like, is one group, you know, quarter squatting versus deep squatting? Like, are you changing the way you use the weight room based on your bucketing of cheetah versus ox?
Yeah, so one very simple tool that you could use is just have them do a squat jump or repetitive squat jump, and you'll see that generally the guys that get off the ground and yield faster to go from that eccentric to asymmetric and back into concentric to get back off the ground, the guys that could bypass that amortization phase a lot quicker as they're doing repetitive squat jumps are more than likely going to express that same strategy out on the field. Whereas the people that you know, go a little lower on their squat jumps, or like their RSIs are showing that they're on the ground longer, and you could visibly see, like, okay, this guy's not as quick as the guy that's yielding quicker. He's on the ground longer. he's more than likely going to express the same strength qualities out as you're doing your dynamic warm-ups. You could just see it with hip, like just watching the hip as it drops. The lower depths that the hips are, the more muscle or the more concentric they're gonna rely on. The more concentrically they're gonna rely as far as using that strategy to get back up. So that's one to me that I find the most interesting that you can do in a weight room. And obviously, if they're doing that, then they're going to do that with the barbell in the back, or they're going to probably express the same depth drop on a squat. And so, in my opinion, I feel full ranges of loaded squats aren't the most necessary if you're just talking about developing athleticism. And this is just my opinion based off of like anecdotal experience, but if a guy's dropping into a quarter squat and he's coming back up and that feels the most comfortable to him, then he's more than likely going to feel the most comfortable with that depth out on the field with something a little more dynamic. Whereas a guy that can go down in lower depths and you could see that he's bracing and he's using very compressive or expansion strategies to stabilize his hips and then get back up, those guys are going to be a little more concentrically biased when they're out in the field. So I don't know. To sum it up, I would say anything within the realm of a squat. Because if you think about a squat, it's a bilateral screen that you could see them eventually using when they go unilateral, and then it becomes more dynamic. So it's more so seeing where they're at as far as comfortability goes on the squats or depth squats.
Yeah, early in my career, I was just super like, everybody must squat to depth, like no matter what. And then like I got to pro ball and you see some guys that are like these long, wiry guys and they've got like 315 and you're like, this guy's going to get absolutely stapled by this. And then they blow it up for like a, 1.0 on a gym wear or something. You're like, what is going on here? And it's like, I don't know if it was like because I was in college and I was around football a lot, like if there was a lot of like grinder type squatting or what it was, but it's really making me think about like your ox versus cheetah analogy here is like some guys are super quick and they're super springy. And I think a lot of like young Latin guys for me kind of check that box as like, you see them put 315 on their back and they look like they're going to crumble and they're super unstable. And then they just, and they blow it up and you're like, what happened there? And then like some younger American kids for me, like they're, full depth, like they're willing to grind it out. Like they'll throw an extra 25 pounds on there just to try to hit a 1 rep max and just literally grind and grind and grind. I don't know. Have you seen, cause you get to work with the young kids and you have that mix of young Latin guys, young American guys. Have you seen differences in that, or is it not as universal as I think?
I think the only a big challenge for us is first introducing proper movement, because you think about some of these countries that they come up from compared to the US schooling system. Like we've been exposed to PE here, physical education, so we've been able to chase each other for tag or play basketball or jump. And something that's kind of standard with the American population is like, as you're growing up from junior high, you're trying to touch the backboard, then eventually the net, and then the rim, and reps after reps, like you learn how to jump. And I know in the past you've experimented with improving jumps, and I think you still are. I'm not sure if you're dunking a basketball yet.
Oh yeah, I'm still doing it. I'm still experimenting.
So we know that rep after rep, it's more so the nervous system just figuring out the best strategy to use to get up higher. And I think with the US school system, like, or us going through PE and then junior high here, like we got to play basketball, we got to go up for layups, and that's something that hasn't been introduced to a lot of these countries. So with that, most of these Latin American guys are, you could consider are still going, although they're professional athletes, are going through PE. And so it's more so physical education on our end to see, well, does he even know how to jump, and does he know how to absorb, those forces when he's landing? And if not, then let's teach him the proper ways And once he understands, proper mechanics of jumping and landing, then it's just see what strategies he develops. Like, is he going to adapt or evolve towards an ox, or is he going to adapt or evolve towards a cheetah? Because we first had to introduce proper mechanics, and now it's more so him trying to find or trying to explore strategies that allow him to be the most stable. And that's kind of the whole concept between introduction, exploration, and then stabilization. And that's something I took away from Altus is in those phases, you could have these guys go through a proper progressional development plan. So introduce what we're looking for, let them explore the best strategies, and then let them stabilize. And then once you start finding that they're getting more comfortable with either being an ox or a cheetah, then we go back towards, all right, well, which strategies are they using? Are their hips dropping lower on counter movement jumps, or are they putting the yield, are they putting the brakes a lot sooner and jumping back up? So I think that's, to sum that component up, is we have them go through PE, we introduce what's right, let them explore which strategies is best for them, and then they go through stabilization, and now we figure out, do they evolve towards oxes or do they evolve towards cheetahs? And then from there, we can actually have them bucketed and then start developing those qualities that are going to help them become better athletes.
Do you think one is more advantageous than the other in the context specifically of professional baseball? Like, I think I've seen both players thrive, right? Like the ox and the cheetah. Do you think one is more advantageous than the other? And do you think you can unintentionally train somebody out of that and make them worse?
Yeah, I think more so you can train the ox to use bad habits than the cheetah. Just because the cheetah's already in its most comfortable position as it's running from the gates. Like, it's way easier, especially in baseball, because let's think about the context of baseball specifically when it comes to running, is more so when you're running around bases or you're defending or you're stealing, you're upright to kind of sense and analyze what's going on. Unless you're committed to steal, then it's acceleration. But if you're looking around and figuring out where the ball's going or what's going to happen, it becomes more of a tactical context. So for you to analyze, you have to be upright. However, if you're committed to stealing, or you put a bunt down and you're committed to getting the first, then that's a commitment that you're making to accelerate there. So that's an appropriate time to accelerate. So I think to keep these guys from being in a disadvantageous position, we got to teach them what acceleration is and then what maximum velocity is, and then let them figure out on their own, like, what to use, like pull it out of their own toolbox and then let them use it. Because if you constantly tell somebody, hey, this is how you accelerate and you must accelerate this way, then they're going to be accelerating as they're trying to look up for the ball and see like what's going on in the game. And then if there's an opportunity that they have to go back to first, let's say they're rounding first and the ball hits the corner and they have to redirect, but they were falling as they're redirecting because you tell them that have to accelerate, like that's a lot more forces for them to counter and to get back to first. So I think more so we let them know, hey, like this is how you gain momentum and then this is how you maintain momentum. So now it's your opportunity to learn when to use it, when to pull it out of your toolbox. This is a good opportunity to be an ox if you're trying to get to a committed destination. And this is a good opportunity for you to be a cheetah if you're trying to get to, if you're trying to get a double. So yeah, it's more so teaching them what to use or how to use it. And then they start figuring out when to use it.
I gotcha. One of the big things that's kind of come up in speed training over the last few years, myself included, right? We talk about experimenting and things like that, is like the foot and the ankle in the whole picture. So let's talk about like foot and ankle control for a little bit.
Yeah, dude. So this has been like something I've been working on myself. And I have a niece. She's a senior. She goes here in Texas. She's a senior in high school. She's currently ranked 6th in the 100-meter. And so right now I'm having her work on this, and it's crazy to me to think, she's around the same age as a lot of the younger guys in at the academy. So it makes me question, like, all right, what's going on with the foot ankle, and why doesn't she have any control of it? And she's never really thought about it. It's always been, all right, let's just do a squat and let's just do deadlifts and let's do some, biceps and your traditional high school mirror lifts that we would do. And so I had her take her shoes off, and I've had this done with a few other guys as well. But just have them take their shoe off and have them lift the knee up like if they're in an A position or like an A hold. And then you'll see them trying to grab the ground so they have control. And that lets you know, okay, well, if they don't have control, then there's not a good foot ankle complex communication with the nervous system. The brain doesn't really even know how to use the foot without the shoes. And so here's the biggest thing I've shifted from, as far as like why the foot ankle should be prioritized, especially when it comes to any prep work with acceleration or max velocity, is, if you look at the hips or the core, we know that it's trying to minimize or prevent movement. The whole anti-rotational, anti-flexion, anti-extension, and anti-lateral flexion, I believe. And it's about minimizing or preventing movement. Well, let's look at the foot ankle complex with the same concept. It's more so that your foot ankle complex is trying to prevent movement. So, when you're rounding a base when you're running curvilinearly, like, you're trying to minimize eversion. Let's use a base runner, for example. He's rounding first. The right foot is trying to prevent anti-inversion because it's already inverted. So it can't do more of it. And the way you prevent that is by everting. And then the foot that's in is everted. So it's trying to prevent further eversion by getting into inversion. So it's more so about minimizing movement. And let's look at acceleration. It's about preventing dorsiflexion. Like if we talk about the heel not collapsing, the heel touching the ground, well, we're trying to minimize or prevent dorsiflexion by plantar flexing into the ground. So when I look at the foot ankle, it's about how can we get the brain to get more familiar, how to communicate with the foot ankle complex so it could prevent movement or minimize movement. So the same concept we have with anti-movement or anti-plantar movement with the hips or the core, like the foot ankle complex is no different. It's about minimizing or preventing movement so you don't find yourself with a sprained ankle if you're excessively inverting with the right foot as you're rounding a base.
So what are you doing to train that? Are you so for instance, like I've gotten into the spring ankle series from Cal Dietz, Chris Corpus. I love doing it. I've been using it a lot in my prep stuff, and I think for me it's helped me. What are you doing to train these quote unquote the anti-movement qualities?
I think a very rudiment strategy is just utilizing like an Eric's pad. An Eric's pad, if you think about just how unstable that surface is itself, it's a good opportunity for them to kind of just communicate with the foot and build those strength, endurance qualities to just maintain that position. You do that for time, and I mean this goes for everyone. Like you do it for time, you do it for a minute. Like you'd feel, the shank. You'd feel, all these muscles that are involved with stiffness as you're accelerating. Like you feel them firing up. So it's almost like an activation for your shank and below. So starting off maybe with an Eric's pad. Once there's communication, or if you had a period of time that you think the brain's communicated with the foot ankle complex, then you can progress that towards very low amplitude single leg hops. Now it becomes a little more dynamic, and they have to stabilize their absorption of forces. And that's where you'll see the knee shifting in and out. you'll see the knee kind of collapsing, and that's more so just a flag of what's going on below the joint. You look at the joint by joint approach, and you can look at the joint by joint approach as far as like which joints are most stable and which joints aren't. And with the knee moving in and out to try to, counter moments so your hip's stable and you don't collapse, that's just a red flag on the foot ankle complex not really having that stability. So going with the Eric's pads and single leg hops, very low amplitude so they get comfortable, and then you can progress that with higher amplitude, which is like your higher elevated single leg hops, your single leg broad jumps or hops. And this is something to get creative with. I feel, and through my experience, harder surfaces are easier just because they have to try to, it's a stable surface. Whereas if you go on the grass, you have to compress into the ground, or compress the grass into the ground and make it compacted before you can actually stabilize on it. So when you think about the grass, it's almost like an Eric's pad, but in its natural state. So looking at the surfaces too is something that you could progress or regress. And one way you can progress the intensity is going from harder surfaces to more unstable, which would be, single leg hops on harder surfaces, and then take that over into the grass barefooted. That's the thing too, though. It's taking the shoes off. Just because your shoe has a sole that's, very rigid, and it's easy for you to gain balance or control using your shoe. But as far as like natural qualities, barefoot is something that I feel could be the best investment.
One of the most ridiculous things that people make fun of me for is I went through a time, and I'll still do it occasionally, where I'll brush my teeth standing on one leg. And like, people think I'm ridiculously crazy for it, but I would stand on my left foot for a minute, and I would do 30 seconds of brushing right hand, 30 seconds left. And then I would switch feet and I would switch hands. So I was doing like left,
Smart.
right, left. And I'm telling you, like, by the end of it, my teeth, well, I don't know if they were better or worse because I'm not very good left-handed, but like the dexterity in my hands like was better, and my ability to feel the ground under my feet was better, because every day, you brush your teeth twice a day. I was spending 4 minutes a day in single leg stance, and it was like that added up over time. And I still get made fun of for it, rightfully so. It's a little bit ridiculous if you walk in my bathroom and see me like flamingo brushing my teeth, but like, it just helped me. And so I've always thought about that. I think like Dan John is somebody I read a lot of, right? And one of his simple tests is like, can you just stand on one leg? And if you can do that for 30 seconds to a minute, can you do it with your eyes closed? And like, there's different ways to progress, like being able to feel the ground. And I think a lot of athletes miss just being able to feel the ground, right? Like our hips, our hamstrings, our glutes, our quads are so powerful, but you can't express that into the ground if your feet and your ankles are weak. Do you agree with that? Like, that's just kind of how I always thought of it, is like, if I can strengthen that complex, I should be able to like express more force into the ground and like be faster and jump higher because my feet are stronger.
Yeah. So we know research says you can't generate optimal forces on unstable surfaces. And so the whole concept of that is create more of a stable surface, which you can create with your own feet. But you have to get familiar with using your feet, whether it's, on the Eric's pad or on one foot brushing your teeth. Like, get the brain to create those pathways to get comfortable with the foot ankle complex, so you can create a stable surface within your organism, if that makes sense. Like within your own feet, creating a stable surface so you can generate higher forces, because you are as strong as your weakest link. And if your ankle's not primed and not stable enough to allow the transfer forces that are happening at your hips, then it's collapsing or it's leaking at your foot ankle complex. So I'm actually going to steal that idea from you, because I like just creating new pathways within your brain, but the dexterity component of brushing your teeth on one foot, dude, that's next level stuff. So, and regardless of, if people look at you crazy, it's like, dude, like there's so much going on right now that you have no idea about. Like, this is a good investment. And we take what? I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes brushing our teeth. Like, dude, that adds up, man. Like, that adds up as far as like time under tension with the ankle. You add that up at the end of the week, man. That's over an hour for each foot.
Now I need to get an RX pad for my toothbrushing. That's my. Somebody's gonna text me and say you're still ridiculous for doing this, but I'm telling you, like, it'll change how your feet feel. It'll change how your ankles feel. So that's my 2 cents. It is a little bit crazy. I understand that, but I also am a little bit crazy. So it is what it is. But okay, so let's get back to the Ox versus Cheetah. We talked like max velo versus acceleration. Like, just kind of talk me through like the positions you're teaching guys to get in, and like what kind of language you're using to get players just to kind of wrap their heads around that.
Yeah, so it's more so about making it very simple for them to grasp, like us as strength and conditioning or athletic performance or whatever title that you may have that helps improve performance. Like, we understand strength qualities, we understand the kinetics and kinematics. Like, that's not their language. So it's about finding common grounds on the vocabulary that we all understand. And so I'll talk about acceleration first, and then I'll go into max velocity. But when we look at acceleration, we have plenty of research on key performance indicators or KPIs that on, there's specific leverages that we need to be in as we're falling. And there's certain force directions that we need to target as we're falling. So first and foremost, like I look at the foot pathway, just because we're trying to prevent taxation at the hamstrings, hamstring strains that are preventable through mechanics. That happens with where the heel's traveling. And so when you look at people in acceleration, there's a term called low heel recovery and then high heel recovery. And acceleration, it's low heel. Low heel is essentially the foot traveling horizontally, not vertically, as you're accelerating. It's traveling horizontally. And if you're viewing it from the side, or if you have kinograms, or if you're just going through video analysis, just watching the heel travel horizontally and not coming higher than the contralateral knee. And that should, it's something to keep in mind too, is acceleration, the phase happens so quickly. And it almost happens within at most 5-6 steps, because they're already gaining momentum, and that's if they're not already upright because they're having to look around. But low heel travels horizontally, and it does it past the contralateral knee, and obviously we're looking for dorsiflexion. As they're transitioning to maximal velocity, we're looking at more of a circular pattern. So acceleration is more of an oval pattern with the foot. It's traveling more like a piston. And so this is where the common grounds come in, as far as us and them understanding the vocabulary, is just teach them, hey, we're looking for oval shapes. We're looking for the foot to travel horizontally, not up. Do you feel oval? And as they're watching their partners go through it, or go through acceleration mechanics or drills, like, they should be able to see and distinguish, oh, okay, that looked oval more than circular. So going into max velocity, the heel should be traveling more circular. That's the heel now traveling vertically, not horizontally. Traveling vertically and coming up higher than the contralateral knee, the knee that's in stance space. And you'll see a circular pattern go. And that's something that you could teach the guys, or let them know, is, look, like, once you're accelerating and you feel like you gain momentum, you want to think about jumping on a bike and pedaling where the heel's coming up to the hip and then going around like a circle. The only second rule I give them, as far as like where the heel's traveling, well, the first rule is obviously like, are you traveling horizontally or are you traveling vertically? Is the foot or the heel should never pass the knee in any phase. At no phase should the knee or the heel pass the knee. If it's past the knee at any point, like we need to address that and just make sure that they're understanding why the heel should not pass the knee. And it's critical. Like you look at a lot of these hamstring strains, like especially in acceleration, like the thighs traveling 250 to 350 degrees per second. That's the limb velocity. And now to have your shank swinging around with that momentum, like that, no, that's obvious why hamstring strains occur during acceleration. So if we could keep that heel locked underneath the knee and not passing it, that will prevent a lot, and it would help them express forces better. And the second thing, other than the foot path, so I'll summarize that real quick, is it low heel or high heel recovery? And is the heel fixed at the knee and not passing it at any point of the swing phase? And trunk rotation, just to sum that up, like the acceleration phase, the trunk should be more incline or decline. It should be falling. If you think about acceleration, it's really about how well can you fall. And so for you to fall, you have to let your trunk fall. So the trunk should be at maybe you're looking at 40, 45, and there's a bandwidth depending on limbs and how tall somebody is, but trunk rotation should be more at a 45-degree angle. And at the point that the foot hits the ground, that the angle of the shin should be right where the trunk is. And so that's something that if you haven't had enough reps at looking, practicing through video analysis could help you help you gain those repetitions as a coach to see, all right, trunk's falling correctly, good. Now the trunk's slowly starting to come up, good. Trunk's upright and fully perpendicular to the ground at max velocity phase. And looking at that throughout the phase is something that becomes easier through repetition. So foot pathway, trunk orientation, those are the two things I look at as far as what's going on mechanically with each athlete.
There are coaches who have like set distances where they think like athletes should be accelerating for this amount of time and then hitting max velocity. But listening to you speak about the ox versus the cheetah, I feel like that doesn't necessarily play for you, right? Like, obviously there's a difference on preference for those two athletes. Like, are you ever like trying to hit certain points and then like, all right, we need to accelerate here? Or are you just kind of letting them flow, and then if they get upright right away, you just let them go and you kind of just work to their preference?
Yeah, I've had the most success with them just running, and you start seeing where they're becoming more upright. Because if they're, and this doesn't even matter, like if they have a good understanding of the appropriate mechanics, like if you just have somebody that doesn't even know what sprinting is and he just runs as hard as he can, he naturally just has to fall to gain momentum. Like you have to, unless you're doing high knees in place, like you're not going anywhere. So if somebody's falling or accelerating and you see him already at upright, because you see the trunk already upright at 6 yards or 5 yards, or after the third or fourth step, then that's going to be kind of the general area he's going to be rising, even with clean mechanics. And that's just kind of the way I've looked at it and had success with. And then once you start cleaning up mechanics, and let's say he's able and he gets comfortable with falling further, then that comes with time. But if he's going upright at the third step or fourth step, then that's going to be the bandwidth, distance that he's already going to be doing it, even with clean mechanics. And as he gets more comfortable with falling, that distance may become a little further. But there's no, and I don't know, like if you find research on it, please send it my way. But there's nothing that says, hey, he has to be at 10 yards before he gets to max velocity. There is research that says, the most elite sprinters in the world can accelerate up to 50 to 60 meters. But that's not our population. And that population is accelerating and sprinting towards a committed destination. There's no reactive stimuli that they have to take into court, they have to consider. So in our population, it may be just 10 yards or 6 yards, but it sure isn't 50 to 60 meters like, these elite sprinters at, the world championships. So to answer your question, there's not a set destination. If they feel the most comfortable upright at their third or fourth step, like that's going to be your general area that they're going to be upright already.
Something that I contemplated on this season was we had a guy who's known for his speed, and he's right on the cusp of like baseball's 30 feet per second elite speed category, but you watch him and he looks like he's flying, and I'm trying to get down to the bottom of this, and I'm like, he's on the cusp. He's not like beyond other people's numbers, but like what is making him, one, appear fast, and two, like cover that ground so quickly? And we did some digging, and he is at top speed like immediately, like very, very quick. He's able to get to his top speed, and he's able to maintain that. And so it's something that I've talked with some people and just kind of pondered on myself, is like team sports in general. I feel like there's a very big emphasis put on acceleration qualities. And I think sometimes, one, you miss out on like training those guys that are just, they get to max velo really quick. But two, it's like if it's 90 feet to first base on a ball in the infield and I'm accelerating for, 60 feet of that, just for reference sake, like I'm only at my max velo for that last 30 feet, where like this guy, for instance, can get to his max velo in the first 10 to 15 feet, and then he can ride that all the way through the bag. Like presumably he's probably going to get to the bag faster. So like, I don't know. I've always thought like max velocity doesn't get the love it deserves. And especially in team sports, where like everybody's like, oh, you need to work on acceleration, marching drills, sled drills. And like, but the reality is like, if I'm still accelerating and you're already at top speed, like you should be able to maintain that top speed through the bag. Like you're probably going to beat me to the bag. Like again, it's going to depend on, your predisposition genetically, how you've trained, all of that stuff. Like you say, the ox versus the cheetah, like that's going to play into it. But I just feel like if we pound acceleration on people and we just totally neglect max velocity, like I think we miss out on certain people and certain qualities that we can develop. Agree, disagree? You can disagree with me if you
for
want.
sure. No, like I'm not going to take the ox off the wagon and then put the cheetah in there to pull it. Like that's not its strategy. Its strategy is just to get upright, expand its spine so it can get going. And that's the most comfortable way of it. Like you look at genetics, epigenetics, like that's over time, like through your childhood development, you're going to find already kind of the best strategy for you to break momentum and sustain it. And if somebody's already upright, maybe on their first step, that's his strategy. Like we can't break it. And if you break it, now you got to think about every segment that you're having to manipulate while he's running. You're talking about the foot ankle, you're talking about the shin, you're talking about the thigh, you're talking about the lumbopelvic and the spine and the arms and the central nervous system to make sense of now falling when it's been used to being upright to get going. Like I don't know, you're messing with a lot of things there that could be very counterproductive and disadvantageous and potentially harmful. If we like, it's just, you can't really put a cheetah to pull a wagon. Like it's not its strategy, nor are you going to see an ox, chasing after a gazelle. Like it's not its strategy. Like let's use the strategies that they already have and get better at it is now where I've shifted my concepts as far as helping people run better. And again, there's a bandwidth. Like we know if somebody's already at high heel as they accelerating, like let's maybe clean that up a little. But if it looks athletic and he's sprinting, at really good speeds, like, and there may be a point where we just don't touch it. Like just let it be. Like, does he have a history of hamstring injuries, or does he? Because if not, like, and he's within a good score of like, all right, his shank leverage looks good. His thighs move well. He has good posture. Like, you kind of are better off just leaving it alone.
This is going to be
And
loaded. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say, dude. So I believe it's the Chinese have a force plate that's, I don't know. You could look this up. I think it's like 80 meters or 100 meters. But the crazy thing about this is that we can actually look at where the ratio as far as horizontal to vertical forces shifts towards one spectrum to the other. And so, like, unless we had a force plate that goes from home plate to first, and then we have them run as fast as they can, and then we just look at the metrics to see he shifted to vertical force orientations after his fourth step, then only then will we actually like be able to know, like, all right, he only accelerates for 4 steps, and he's good at upright after that. Like, let's just let it be. But if you're seeing like horizontal forces that are braking forces, like, ground reaction forces are now going against you because your foot's past your center of mass, like, that's an issue. And I think that's where we're here to clean up. We're here to clean, not really like fix or construct the building. We're here just to like be janitors and clean the building up.
I like that analogy a lot. I do.
I just came up with it right now.
So this is going to be loaded, but sets, reps, volume. How are you prescribing it? Are you just cutting it off at certain points? Are you giving it no matter what? Is it in season, out of season, different? Like, it's super loaded, but run with it.
Yeah. I think, one thing that we know is just it's very beneficial to create those aerobic qualities during the off season, so they can have all those properties to let them recover faster during the season. So me as a biased trail runner, like, I really find a lot of quality into during the off season when like mechanics aren't the most important. Like, get out on the trail and run. Like, go for distance. Develop those aerobic qualities that are going to help you recover once it's time to get higher intensities in. So finding different variations or modalities, whether it's jumping in a pool or anything, just get the fascial system to stretch in positions it's never been. You look at people swimming, like, man, there's a lot going on when you're swimming. If you can capture somebody as they're going through a stroke, and then you just place them vertically and look at the picture, it's like they're doing skips for height. Like, the fascial system doesn't really differentiate like the stretching it's going through. So, like, just develop those aerobic qualities during the off season. And then once it comes closer to the season, like, now we start working with like the nervous system getting comfortable with, higher rates and higher frequencies with the neural discharges. And now we start developing like those anaerobic qualities that are in a better position to recover. And ways that we can work on with that is obviously longer distances during the off season and more short, higher intensities during the off season or during the season. And I think at this point we have a menu of different exercises that we can select that can fit those 2 different spectrums on what we're trying to target. I will say the one thing though is during the season, like, I like your cheetah categories, like, those guys should still do a lot more upright, a lot more like skips for distance, balance for distance, hops for longer distances. I'm not looking for like hops that are like 100 yards or anything that's very long, but these guys benefit more with elastic endurance, and that's something that they're more comfortable with doing. Whereas your oxes are going to be more comfortable with like short bursts, accelerations, your sleds, your run rockets, your band resisted bouts, and that's something that they're going to want to do more because that's their genetic or epigenetic upbringing. So I think during the season, like, you also have an opportunity to find what they're the most comfortable with doing, and then let them ride with that. Don't always think the cheetah needs to go do ox stuff and the ox needs to go do cheetah stuff. Like, let them do what's comfortable for them during the season and let them do it at higher intensities.
I think the the point that you made about aerobic, anaerobic, like in baseball, baseball's getting to this point where like nobody wants anybody to run distance ever. And I'm really, really like, I'm very torn about it. I actually think like running distance is beneficial for people, as crazy as that is. Like we're both probably going to get absolutely destroyed about this, but there's just something about it that like when I do it, I feel better. And like, I'm not saying everybody needs to go out and run miles all the time, but I had a conversation with a kid the other day. He's an exercise science student. And he said, bro, my professors can't even run a mile. And it's like, if you have a guy run a mile, it's like the end of the world in the baseball setting, right? Like, oh my God, he ran distance. And then you think about it, it's like, how many times as a kid did you just run a mile, like just to warm up for sporting activities? And now, granted, again, we've already discussed the dynamic warm up. That's not necessarily the best warm up, but it's like, if you can't go out and run a mile, like I'm very concerned for your ability to play 162 games in a season in 180 days with the travel, with, you know, the late nights, the early mornings, all of the practice, like just your ability to handle the stress and recover from it. Like, I don't know, there's somewhere along the line, there's just become this disconnect of like, you don't need to develop aerobic and you'll just recover because the game itself takes care of it. Like, I don't know. It's weird. Like, do you have additional thoughts on this? Am I crazy? Are we both crazy?
No, dude. All right. So there's a really good book. It's called the Manual for the Uphill Athlete. The Manual for the Uphill Athlete. Really good book. And they talk specifically about why it is important on incorporating, you know, those longer distances. So the key takeaway that I took from this book is whether you like it or not, you are born with your muscle distribution. Like the muscle fibers that you have, you're not going to shift slow twitch to fast twitch. Like it's not going to happen. But what will happen is if you continuously only train fast twitch, because we know what stimulates fast twitch fibers, your plyometrics, your heavier loads, then those are the only muscle fibers that are going to continuously be stimulated. And they will continue to go through the hypertrophy phase. They'll continuously, you know, build, they'll grow. And the opposite is true for your slow twitch that you're not stimulating. So your slow twitch are kind of just there hanging out, wondering why are we just here? Like the only way you can stimulate me the most is if we do what we like to do. And that's longer distances. That's going to be long, slow, and comfortable activities. So we're not asking for people to be cross country runners, because I know we get that all the time. Like, hey, I'm not here to, you know, do cross country. It's more so, hey, no, I don't want you to be a cross country athlete, obviously, but there are certain fibers in you that won't be stimulated unless we do that. And so it's more of having the slow twitch go through hypertrophy, and the only way to have them go through hypertrophy is to stimulate them. And the only way they get stimulated is through low or long, slow distances. So it's more so making sure nothing goes through, nothing gets neglected. There's no atrophy going on, like, because at some point hypertrophy happens with the muscle fibers that you keep stimulating, and then atrophy will happen for the fibers that aren't stimulated. And so that was a key takeaway for me. And the only positive thing that happens out of that is you have hypertrophy at the slow twitch by increasing mitochondrial density. Like, if that doesn't sound appealing to you, I don't know what does as far as a recovery standpoint.
That was like fourth grade biology, right? Like mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and nobody knew what it was at the time. It was just on your test. But like, I don't know. It's just weird. That I think the biggest thing for me that I've kind of observed is like, as strength coaches, we take our own training bias and we try to push it on athletes, right? Like power lifter guys, like, you just need to get stronger and you'll get better at your sport. And then like long distance runners, like everybody should be running all the time. Like the weight room's not as important. And then like basketball players like, oh, we need to jump all the time. Like, and I think we need to put our own bias of training aside and just do what is best for the athlete and understand the physiology and understand the training and why it's important and what we're going to get out of it. And I really believe, like I said, this student, he said, like, my professors can't run a mile. And I was like, that's ridiculous. Like, just for the sake of being a person, like, if you can't go out and run a mile at any point in time, like, that should give you concern. You shouldn't be like, well, I don't need to run a mile, I'm not a distance runner. No, it's like, why can't I run a mile? Like, when you're a kid, you could go out and run a mile anytime you wanted. And I think a lot of strength coaches have gotten in so far invested into the strength side of strength and conditioning that they neglect their own conditioning. So they're like I don't know, maybe they're trying to justify their thoughts and like, oh, you don't need a condition, it's not that important. It's like, no, it's pretty important.
Yeah, right. It's almost, we're shifting towards strength and stretching coaches. I don't know why, like, conditioning's there anymore for a lot of us. And like, it's not even about like conditioning itself to develop, like, these aerobic qualities. It's also more about conditioning your ability to produce good shapes, good mechanical, sound mechanics. Like, can you produce those sound mechanics for a long duration? If so, you're going to be at a better spot when it's the 12th inning and you're dog tired and they hit a ball towards your corner. It's like, oh, you know what? I could accelerate there with good mechanics because I've conditioned for that. I'm conditioned for that. Already being tired and standing for 4 hours, it's like I could still run towards that because I've been conditioned enough to produce sound mechanics. So it's not always about, hey, like, let's look at what's going on with the muscle fibers. It's more so like, can we create sound mechanics for long durations and when you're tired?
Yeah, I just think the reality is, like, if you run distance every once in a while, like, you're not just going to automatically wither away to nothing or like turn into a marathon runner or anything. Like, the amount of training that goes into becoming a quality marathon runner and the distances run and the miles put in, like, it's an absurd amount of training to the other end of the spectrum, right? But marathon runners still strength train, right? Like, they still do just enough of it. And I don't think marathon runners are like, oh, I'm not a power lifter. They're like, no, I understand that for me to be better at running the marathon, I need to do a little bit of strength training. For me to be a better, power athlete, I need to do a little bit of distance running just so that I can repeatedly do those power bouts without being exhausted. Just my own thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I have not come across a marathoner or a trail runner, and I've been, interested in the distance community, and I've not come across one that's like, strength training, no, I'm not going to be a power lifter. Like, you don't hear that. It's more so, oh yeah, I'm understanding, developing general strength. It's going to help with each stance. It's going to help, maintain good posture, and it's just going to help with general health. Like, that's usually the feedback you get from the distance community. And I feel like with, like, team sports or certain populations, it's more so, I'm not gonna be a marathoner. Like, I'm not, no. Like, and they almost resist you. It's like, no, I'm not gonna join the cross country team. Dude, if like cross country or like marathon or long distance sports did not exist, I guarantee they, like, more people would do it. But because it is a sport itself, it's like, no, that's a whole nother sport, completely on the opposite side of the spectrum. It's like, if it didn't exist, like, more people would do it.
I think it's just because it's hard, right? And like squatting heavy is hard, right? But it's over in 5 seconds, 10 seconds, right? Like, running long distance, like, if you run an 8-minute mile, it's not going to be over for 8 minutes, right? And that whole 8 minutes, you're going to be like, what did I get myself into? Why am I doing this? This is stupid. My knee hurts, my ankle hurts. But once you get through it, like, you feel better, right? Like, and you've become better and again, we're not saying that you need to go out and run 50 miles a week. That's not, at least that's not what I'm saying, right? Like, it's just every once in a while, like, there is benefit to mixing it in. And like, I don't know. It's just, we can go on about this for a long time, and we're probably going to get absolutely destroyed, but it's okay. Like, it's something I'm willing to stand behind for sure.
Yeah. As far as a general health standpoint, it's needed. Like,
I agree 100%.
in the American culture, like, now we're shifted towards, we're blue collar and we're white collared people. It's like we've separated ourselves so far from like the evolutionary aspect of who we are as humans to think, no, we're blue collar people, we're white collar. It's like, dude, running is something that's so natural to us, like for general health, like as far as an evolutionary standpoint. Like, we think we separate ourselves so far from that, and it's like, dude, no, like as just general healthy humans, like we need it.
All right, everybody, that concludes part 1 of this 2-part episode with Ricky. I hope you enjoyed this one. To be honest, this was really a beast of an episode. I took a ton of notes, and there was just a lot of really good diving into a lot of really good topics on creating athleticism in baseball players. The ox versus the cheetah talk, the foot and ankle control, the acceleration versus max velo, and then, of course, the conditioning at the end. And I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you took a lot of good notes, and there will be plenty of more good content coming out in part 2 with Ricky. 3 things that I took from Ricky in this episode: you are only as strong as your weakest link. Utilize the dynamic warm-up as an opportunity to improve athletic qualities, and train the foot-ankle complex with the same anti-movement principles of training the core to create stability and control. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you again on the next one.